Carl Levin of the Senate said that Apple sought out the holy grail of tax avoidance. Right now, that's legal. Should it be?
Well, probably not, but the fact of the matter is that Congress has created a very intricate system, and companies can be expected to take advantage of it. So it's a question for Congress, not for Apple.
Okay, well, Jesse, I want to bring you into this conversation because you've covered all sorts of companies from Google to Yahoo to Cisco to Dell on their treatment of taxes on overseas earnings. Is what Apple is doing that much more worse than what any of the other tech companies are doing?
Well, it's pretty similar to what they're all doing. I mean, you know, broadly speaking, what all these companies do is they figure out ways to get profits out of the U.S., classify them as foreign profits, and then once they're foreign profits, get them into a tax haven like Bermuda or the Cayman Islands. I mean, the sheer amounts of money at stake here with Apple are huge just because Apple is such an enormous company. But, you know, substantively, it's very similar to what these other companies do. That doesn't make it right. And also, you know, I think it's careful, you know, kind of in terms of saying it's legal, the broad framework of companies shifting profits overseas is legal. They're permitted to do that. Mm-hmm. The amount they shift and their methods for shifting it are the subject of constant disputes with the IRS and tax authorities across the world. So it's not, we shouldn't just assume that the results are okay.
Jesse, are we going to see some sort of coordinated action among countries? It sounds like the U.S. can't really go at this alone if we're talking about foreign governments and overseas earnings.
Right. So, I mean, right now, well, I mean, there's kind of two answers. Right now, the OECD, which is a government-funded, essentially a government-funded think tank in Paris, funded by governments around the world, is in the midst of a big project that it's going to present to the G20 in July to deal with profit shifting and tax avoidance by big companies. That said, there actually probably is quite a bit that the U.S. could do on its own. I mean, the report on Apple includes a number of recommendations, many of which have been things proposed by the Obama administration, and including some things proposed by the Republican chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Dave Camp, and none of them have gone into effect. The reality is the U.S., by being such a big company and being home to some of these big multinationals, probably could do a lot on its own.
Well, I want to bring this back to Scott Galloway and to Tim Cook specifically. How does he come out of this looking better?
He doesn't. Professor Rosenbloom's correct. There's nothing wrong with Apple taking advantage of tax loopholes. Where Apple is screwed up here is bragging about it and raising the concern and complaining about it. If you're able to have some of the lowest tax rates in the world while being the most profitable company in the world, you don't go in front of Congress to complain about it.
So what does he do to come out looking like a leader of the industry? I mean, there's been a lot of criticism that he's kind of shirked back. He hasn't been a Steve Jobs kind of figure.
Well, this isn't where he should have picked his punches. He's effectively going into the ring against John McCain and Carl Levin. He's like a boxer going into the ring and putting his chin up against Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson. He is justifiably going to get mauled in front of Congress.
Well, David, I don't know. I don't buy the idea that he's necessarily complaining about it. Perhaps he's trying to be proactive here in stimulating some sort of legitimate conversation about how to change the U.S. corporate tax code. What do you think?
Well, the companies have been pushing for some time for what they call reform, which is really reduction in taxes. And I think Apple will use this occasion to push for a territorial system and perhaps a lower corporate tax. The problem really is that Congress has created such a monstrosity in terms of our overall laws that there are relatively few people who truly understand what's going on here. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be a pretty big mistake for the United States to go totally territorial, because I think we don't have the anti-abuse mechanisms in place to protect against what would ensue. Also, the big missing picture here is that the Revenue Service has been systematically starved by Congress for decades, and they just cannot stand toe-to-toe with the multinationals on these kinds of issues.
David, there's been a lot of urging for a tax holiday for repatriated earnings. There was, of course, one given in 2004. That didn't work out so well. What are the lessons learned from that for this time around?
My sense is that the lesson has been learned that the money brought back to the United States on that amnesty doesn't really serve the nation very well. I have the impression that liquidity of multinationals is not the big problem in the United States. That's not what's keeping us from increasing jobs. So it's a little unclear why we should go to an amnesty except as part of a broad reform movement. Now, I personally would favor some kind of an amnesty for accumulated earnings, some lower tax rate on them, if that were a transition to a new system. But the 2004-2005 law was effectively a transition to nowhere. We just remained in the same system. That's hypocritical. That's the kind of thing that Mr. Berlusconi does.
Jesse, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to echo on what David said. I mean, actually, you know, there is some academic research that suggests it was not just a road to nowhere, but actually encouraged companies to shift profits, even more profits offshore, because of the expectation that they would get a second tax holiday to bring them back home again. I mean, you know, the thing about the repatriation holiday, the attempted repatriation holiday, is that really is kind of the ultimate act of chutzpah on the part of these companies, right? Yep. They're very aggressively moving profits, in some cases, which probably should be in the U.S., at the very least should be in places like France and Germany and Japan where they have actual sales, into mailboxes in Bermuda and the Cayman Islands and Switzerland.
But Apple's not doing that, and Apple made a point to say that it's not doing that.
Once they've done that, they then want to bring the profits back and get a second tax break, which is, you know, a fairly bold suggestion.
Look, the bottom line here, and John Wild, to you, perhaps, 35%, that is the U.S. corporate tax rate. How broken is America's tax code for corporations?
America's tax code for corporations and for individuals has been broken for a long time. But, you know, can I? I mean, that's not in dispute. But I mean, one point I just want to add to here. Senator Levin made this point yesterday during a conference call with reporters. And a lot of this is going through Ireland. I think that's where a lot of the focus, that's where most of the focus today is going to be. You know, how they were using Ireland specifically to do all the profit shifting. And one point he made was that Ireland was not enforcing its own tax rate. They had a separate deal with Apple, and you know, you look at all the different pressure that is going on in the UK and elsewhere in the EU. I think there are going to be a lot of upset European countries, member EU countries, who are going to be looking at Ireland and saying, you know, what are you doing to the rest of us? This is, you know, economic development kind of gone awry because it's taking, from their perspective, jobs away from other countries.
A lot gone awry.
But that's been true. I mean,
the funny thing here is.
Go ahead, very quickly.
Yeah, I'm sorry not to interrupt John, but, well, just that, you know, Ireland basically was known for years as a place that was trying to attract jobs in manufacturing with a low tax rate. It's essentially morphed into a very different kind of tax system. What Ireland now is doing is enabling companies to move. The tax appeal of Ireland is that it helps companies move profits into mailboxes, not that it gets low taxes on stuff that actually happens in Ireland. Apple demonstrates this, and Google demonstrates this as well.